Welcome the anointed ones. Authority never makes an entrance. It simply arrives, rearranges the entire space, and walks away while everyone scrambles to figure out what actually occurred. Whatever that step turned out to be, it never went viral. It never came with a headline or a dramatic soundtrack swelling in the background. Yet the entire mood pivoted. Dialogue froze. Everyone started running new math in their heads. Somewhere between bewilderment and quiet dread, a sober realization settled across the room. The center of gravity had just relocated, and not in a direction anyone wanted. Here is a truth most grown adults refuse to say out loud. When genuine power changes hands, nobody applauds. There is zero ovation when command shifts. There is silence, sidelong glances, and a sudden wave of, "Let me circle back to you." That happens because authority is not sentimental. It is operational. It reveals itself in who now second-guesses their words, who suddenly requires clearance, and who begins acting like they were rooting for you from the very beginning. Funny how that always plays out. What separated your move was not aggression, not volume, not theater. It was precision and finality. You did not dip a toe in the water. You rewrote the climate. And once that shift lands, people stop questioning whether you belong in the driver's seat. They start debating how they are expected to act now that you are running things. That is when the murmuring begins. That is when every single person around you suddenly transforms into a chess grandmaster, replaying your play like a leaked surveillance video they cannot quite decode. There is also something quietly absurd about watching fully grown humans experience low-grade panic. No one yells, no one flips furniture. Instead, they grin a little too tightly, laugh a half-beat late, and abruptly remember meetings that do not actually exist. That is not random. That is a system recalibrating itself. Jokes aside, those responses are information. They map out precisely who profited from the previous setup and who is sweating about the new one. This is not about ego or dominance. It is about the precise instant when holding back stops being mistaken for softness and starts being understood as a deliberate decision. Your play did not hand you more authority. It illuminated where authority already lived, and once people catch a glimpse of that, they can never erase it. The room understands, the hierarchy understands, even the ones pretending they did not notice understand. And that is exactly where the next chapter opens. Right after the move, the moment everyone grasps that the contest never ended, it simply changed ownership. Number 1. You shattered the silent agreement they assumed you would never break. A pact existed long before anyone spoke it aloud. Unwritten, unsigned, never even openly admitted. It lived in routines, in habits, in expectations. They assumed you would always answer in a predictable way, that you would account for your actions, that you would absorb minor disrespect in the name of keeping the peace, that you would keep swallowing pressure without ever turning the board over. And because you kept doing exactly that for a stretch, they mistook your patience for something permanent. That unspoken pact gave them peace of mind. It let people plan their lives around you, lean into you, push past your lines, and feel completely safe doing so. Not because they held more power, but because they considered you a known quantity. Known quantities are easy to handle. Known quantities are easy to take advantage of, and most folks have no idea how much of their confidence rests on the assumption that you will never change. Then you did. That move did more than catch them off guard. It wiped out their entire operating framework. Suddenly every calculation they had ever made became worthless. The playbook they were running on was obsolete. And the cruelest part for them was this: they could not argue their way out of it. You did not break any rule they could put their finger on. You broke an assumption they never should have trusted in the first place. That is why the reaction stayed quiet. It happened behind closed eyes. Bewilderment surfaced first, then anxiety, then a strange, unfamiliar form of respect they had never extended before. People despise admitting they built their comfort on someone else's discipline. When that discipline vanishes, it drags an uncomfortable truth into the open. You were under no obligation to play that part for them. Severing that pact did not make you careless, it made you genuine. It revealed that your cooperation was a privilege, not a guarantee. And once people register that access to you is earned, not assumed, everything reorders itself. How they speak to you shifts. How they approach you shifts. How far they test you shifts. They are not angry because you were wrong. They are rattled because the version of you they depended on no longer exists, and somewhere deep down, they always knew they should not have assumed it would last. Number 2, you forced every single person to redraw their internal chart of you. Human beings navigate life using mental blueprints, and that absolutely includes blueprints of every individual they engage with. They attach labels, expectations, and invisible fences, often without even noticing they are doing it. They track how aggressively they can push, when to open their mouth, when to swallow their words, and how much risk they can absorb in your orbit. They choreograph their moves around patterns they have watched you run. That is how quiet control operates. Subtle, unseen, and practically invisible until it disappears. Then your move hit. Suddenly the blueprint they depended on no longer matched the territory. Every tiny assumption they had filed about your boundaries, your patience, your reflexes, collapsed all at once. People despise redrawing their internal charts. It is draining and deeply uncomfortable. It compels them to confess that they were wrong, that their confidence rested on incomplete or false data. And nobody enjoys being wrong about a person they believed they had completely figured out. The elegance of this is that it introduces hesitation. Hesitation in the people orbiting you is like sand in someone else's engine. Every decision grinds slower. Every plan already in motion has to be re-evaluated. The more people pause, the more leverage you hold without raising your voice. Your move did not just bend perception, it rewired the entire pattern of how people engage with you. What is fascinating is that the shift is both instant and irreversible. Once someone's internal map has been redrawn, there is no returning to the version that felt safe for them. They now see you as someone who runs the show on your own terms, and that awareness reshapes every exchange that follows. Reverence, wariness, fascination, or careful distance. They all surface naturally from that updated chart, because people instinctively adjust to reality, once they can no longer lean on old assumptions. By forcing that recalibration, you established a quiet strain of authority. No threats, no speeches, no grandstanding, just an undeniable, indisputable truth. You are not who they believed you were, and now they must navigate existence knowing that. That is how you become the one calling the shots, silently yet unmistakably. Number 3, you delivered consequences without opening a negotiation table. Most people confuse authority with convincing others, but real command does not ask. It acts. That move you made came with no explanations, no debates, no attempts to defend itself. It was not wrapped in charm or watered down with compromise. It landed, and it landed with razor clarity. People recognized it immediately, not because it was loud, but because it carried undeniable weight. Consequence was woven directly into the action itself, and every person in the room grasped it without a single syllable. This is what separates control from influence. Influence can be haggled over, bargained away, or flatly ignored. Consequence cannot. When your move landed, it left zero room for reinterpretation. There was no fog. It was not up for discussion. That level of finality forces people to recognize a boundary they did not even know was there. It is terrifying for those who have built entire strategies around poking limits, pressing buttons, and skating the edge of what you would tolerate. They suddenly realize they have no clue where that edge sits anymore. The quiet brilliance is in how softly it claims authority. No spectacle, no performance, just an action that recalibrates how everyone approaches you from that moment on. Every interaction afterward becomes a negotiation in which your terms remain unspoken but fully understood. People stop trying to maneuver around you because they have already tasted the cost of misreading your limits. That is the variety of authority that endures, the kind that does not fade the moment you step out of the room. What makes it even more striking is how it flips every expectation. Those who believed they could manipulate, pressure, or charm their way to an advantage realize none of that works anymore. The terms of engagement have shifted, and you wrote them. That move did not just produce a result, it delivered a lesson. Your presence alone now carries accountability. In that instant, people begin measuring every step they take, every word they let slip, every action they consider. You did not raise your voice, demand loyalty, or explain your reasoning. You simply demonstrated that actions carry meaning and consequences. And in doing so, you established a tier of command that no negotiation could ever undermine. Number 4, you exposed who only ever had guts when you stayed compliant. Courage is a peculiar thing. Most people believe it is measured by loud declarations, bold gestures, or visible acts of defiance, but the kind of bravery that actually matters gets tested quietly in the shadows against someone who refuses to tolerate games. That is exactly what your move brought to light. It did not manufacture enemies. It unveiled the ones who were only ever bold because they assumed you would remain in your lane. The instant you stepped outside that expectation, their confidence dissolved. These are the individuals who thrived on your restraint. They pushed, prodded, and tested limits, all wrapped in the cozy illusion that you were predictable. Their behavior was never about skill, integrity, or strategy. It was about exploiting what they assumed was your weakness. You never owed them predictability, but you offered it. They mistook your discipline for vulnerability, your patience for compliance, your tolerance for passivity. When you finally moved, it triggered a reckoning. The same individuals who strolled around you with such confidence suddenly hesitated, faltered, and recalculated. Their courage came with conditions, and those conditions just shattered. That is why you could practically watch the internal panic unfold. They were forced to confront a brutal truth. The safety net they had leaned on, the version of you that could be managed, nudged, or steered, was gone. And the most striking element of this exposure is how silent it remains. You did not call them out. You did not announce their inadequacy. You simply acted. Their reactions, the hesitation, the avoidance, the overcompensation, did all the heavy lifting. You became the mirror, reflecting the truth they did not want to face. Their bravery was conditional, and it only ever existed because they assumed they controlled the circumstances. This revelation recalibrates the entire balance of power in an instant. The ones who once felt untouchable are now cautious. The ones who relied on your restraint to preserve their advantage are now navigating uncertainty. In one decisive act, you showed that genuine strength does not just open doors for yourself. It exposes the weaknesses of everyone who tried to measure themselves against you. And when that happens, respect, fear, and recalibrated strategy quietly step in to fill the void. Number 5, you rewrote the cost of testing you. Before that move, people treated you like a negotiable variable, like someone whose patience or boundaries could be measured and manipulated. They pushed limits because they believed the risk was low and the payoff was high. They gave little thought to what might unfold if they miscalculated, because they assumed the fallout would be manageable. They were running on outdated math, and your actions rewrote the entire equation. That move did not just claim authority. It recalibrated the price tag attached to every action directed your way. Suddenly, what once felt safe turned risky. Every word, every gesture, every attempt to probe your patience carried a weight they had never considered. They realized they could no longer operate on assumptions, because now the potential penalty was unpredictable. Uncertainty is a quiet variety of power, one that slows people down and forces them to think twice. The brilliance of this is not rooted in intimidation, it is rooted in clarity. You did not need to threaten or dramatize. The consequence was built into what you did. Your move signaled, without uttering a single word, that the old rules no longer applied. Testing you is no longer a casual experiment. It carries real stakes, and everyone in your orbit understood that. That creates a subtle but profound shift. Hesitation becomes the default. People stop pushing because the risk is unknown, and the unknown is far more dangerous than any obvious obstacle. What makes this particularly potent is that it is permanent. Once someone experiences a misstep with consequences they did not anticipate, their internal calculations change forever. They replay that moment every single time they consider pressing against you. They start measuring their actions, weighing your reaction, and questioning whether the behavior they once relied on will still deliver results. By changing the cost of testing you, you did not just protect yourself, you established a boundary that cannot be ignored. People learned the hard way that approaching you carelessly carries consequences. You became someone to be taken seriously, someone whose limits are not suggestions but rules. And in that moment, Without raising your voice or demanding respect, you quietly became the one in charge. Number 6. You erased the illusion that power had to be accumulated step by step. Most people are conditioned to believe that influence, authority, and respect arrive slowly, like climbing a ladder rung by rung, waiting for permission, or proving yourself across years. They believe power is a process, that it can only be achieved by patiently following rules, staying in line, and earning it piece by piece. That belief gives them comfort because it implies power is predictable, controllable, and fair. They assume that unless someone pays their dues, they cannot possibly hold real authority. Then you made the move that shattered that illusion entirely. You did not ask for approval, did not wait for consensus, did not follow anyone's timeline. You acted decisively, and suddenly the rules everyone relied on ceased to matter. The idea that influence had to be accumulated gradually was exposed as a myth. Real authority does not always arrive with a ceremony or a slow build. It arrives when someone acts with clarity, purpose, and timing. It arrives when a single move forces everyone else to adjust to them. That is not just power. That is recognition. What makes this so destabilizing for the people around you is how unpredictable it feels. They have been trained to measure authority by procedure and patience. When you bypass that entirely, you create uncertainty. And uncertainty makes people cautious. They can no longer assume control based on tradition, seniority, or incremental steps, because you just rewrote the game in a single instant. Suddenly, influence exists where it did not exist before, simply because you decided it did. The psychological impact is enormous. People begin to realize they underestimated you, misread you, and relied on outdated assumptions. Those who once choreographed their moves carefully around what they thought was a slow, predictable climb to power, now see that authority can appear instantly. That awareness commands attention, respect, and sometimes even fear, not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it. By removing the illusion that power must be earned gradually, you did not just shift the rules. You became a living example that control is not handed over. It is seized. And once people witness that, the room will never look at you the same way again. Number 7. You proved you were willing to be misunderstood in order to be effective. One of the most overlooked dimensions of real power is the willingness to act even when others do not fully understand your reasons. Most people pour their energy into being liked, into making sure everyone around them sees their intentions clearly, or into explaining themselves in ways that prevent any criticism. That is exhausting and, honestly, wildly overrated. You proved that effectiveness does not come from being universally understood. It comes from being decisive, even when your moves confuse, shock, or frustrate the people around you. The move you made was not about clarity for comfort. It was about clarity for results. People did not instantly get it, and some may have judged you harshly or completely misread your intentions. That is precisely the point. Being misunderstood temporarily is a price very few are willing to pay, but it is a price that separates someone in charge from someone who simply follows. You demonstrated that your priorities are aligned with outcomes, not opinions. And that kind of decisiveness makes everyone else recalibrate how they see you on the spot. The brilliance of this lies in the ripple effect. When people misinterpret your actions, they try to figure out your next step, and they pay close attention. They analyze your behavior, second-guess their assumptions, and start considering that there may be a strategy they are simply too inexperienced to comprehend. That uncertainty elevates your presence without a single word spoken. It forces the room to adapt to you rather than the other way around. Being misunderstood also generates a form of respect that is earned in silence. People realize that results matter more than the narrative. That following your lead carries consequences for them, whether they understand it or not. And in that gap between misunderstanding and recognition, authority grows. Your move created tension, curiosity, and recalibration all at once. And that is a clear sign of someone who is no longer playing by rules others laid down. By showing you were willing to be misunderstood in order to be effective, you revealed a fundamental truth. Leadership is not about consensus, approval, or even clarity. It is about the courage to act decisively in a way that shifts everything, regardless of who fully understands it. and that is how you become the one everyone unconsciously adjusts to. Number 8. You made neutrality impossible. Before your move, people could hover in the gray zones, pretending they did not have to take a stance. They could stay comfortable, say nothing, and let the world and you play out around them while they remained safely on the sidelines. That is how most people operate. Quietly observing, quietly calculating, quietly hoping the storm passes without touching them. But your move eliminated that comfort entirely. Neutrality ceased to exist because your action demanded acknowledgement, attention, and response. Suddenly everyone had to pick a side, whether they wanted to or not. What makes this so powerful is that neutrality is often the silent weapon of the control seekers. People use it to manipulate, delay, or hide their intentions. By refusing to allow that, you forced everyone to confront reality directly. They could no longer act as if they did not care or pretend their opinion did not matter. The space where ambiguity once protected them disappeared, replaced by a clear, undeniable truth. The game has changed, and they are now participants, not spectators. This shift creates tension, and tension is a form of leverage. When neutrality is impossible, hesitation grows. People start measuring every word, every move, and every glance because there is now accountability in action and in inaction. Suddenly, silence is not safety, it is exposure. Those who thought they could coast without consequence are forced to reckon with the fact that every decision, or failure to decide, now carries weight. The brilliance of making neutrality impossible is subtle but devastating. You did not have to dominate verbally or physically. You did not have to explain yourself or demand allegiance. Your single move reframed the room, recalibrating relationships, influence, and strategy. People are compelled to align, oppose, or retreat, and all of these choices serve to solidify your position. By removing the option to stay neutral, you forced clarity where ambiguity once reigned. You made everyone acknowledge your authority, consciously or unconsciously. And in doing so, you established a power that does not rely on consent. It relies on reality. In that moment, the rules changed, and everyone knew it. Number 9. You signaled that your decisions are internally sourced. People underestimate how unsettling it is when someone acts from a place no one can predict or control. Most individuals operate under the assumption that people are influenced, manipulated, or guided by external pressures, approval, fear, loyalty, or the need to belong. They believe that if they apply the right pressure or appeal to the right motivations, they can steer outcomes. Your move destroyed that assumption entirely. By acting decisively and unapologetically, you signaled that your decisions come from within, from your own judgment, priorities, and principles, and not from the influence or expectations of others. That realization lands harder than confrontation. When people understand that your actions are self-directed, their usual levers of control vanish. They can no longer anticipate your moves because you do not run on the same input-output system they expect. This creates uncertainty, hesitation, and a subtle recalibration of their own behavior. Suddenly they are forced to pay attention to you as a sovereign actor, someone whose decisions are not negotiable and not subject to manipulation. The power of being internally sourced lies in the clarity it provides you while simultaneously destabilizing everyone else. You are untethered from their expectations, free to act in alignment with your objectives rather than their approval. They begin to notice patterns that are not patterns at all. Actions driven not by routine or convention, but by intention. That unpredictability is not chaos, it is authority. They see that trying to influence or anticipate you is pointless, because you measure success by your own standard, not by their comfort or their narratives. The ripple effect is immediate. People start treating you differently without knowing exactly why. They pause before acting around you, weighing consequences they cannot fully calculate. They start giving space, respect, or cautious alignment because they recognize that your decisions are self-contained, deliberate, and consequential. In a single move, you did not just assert yourself. You rewired how everyone else approaches you. Being internally sourced is silent dominance. It communicates one truth louder than words ever could. You answer to no one but yourself, and that changes everything. Number 10. You force the room to recalibrate its power centers. Power is rarely static. It moves quietly, shifts subtly, and reveals itself in who people check with, who they defer to, and who they avoid. Most of the time, people do not even notice the patterns. They simply follow them. There are invisible hierarchies, unspoken alliances, and chains of influence that dictate how decisions get made and who actually gets heard. Your move changed all of that instantly. Suddenly, the old power centers no longer applied. Conversations paused, authority lines blurred. People who once assumed control realized they were operating on outdated assumptions, and those assumptions cost them confidence. The recalibration is not something that happens with fanfare. It is not a fight or a dramatic confrontation. It is quiet, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. The ones who relied on influence to maintain their position start second-guessing themselves. Gatekeepers, strategists, and manipulators. All of them begin to rethink their moves. Every action is measured against a new standard. How does this work with you now? Who holds sway, and where do I stand? In that moment, the entire room becomes a live experiment in uncertainty, and you are the variable everyone is trying to understand. What is remarkable is how this shift solidifies your presence without needing to declare it. By acting decisively, you effectively rewrote the map of authority. People start seeking your approval, anticipating your reactions, or adjusting their behavior just to avoid missteps. Even those who resist alignment cannot ignore the new configuration. They are now forced to operate under rules they did not set. This is the quiet, undeniable form of control. It does not scream. It does not demand attention, but it forces recognition. Recalibrating the power centers does not just put you in charge of a moment. It subtly reshapes all future interactions. From that point forward, everyone has to navigate around you. Your presence is no longer just part of the room. It defines how the room functions. In that single move, you did not just assert authority. You became the reference point that everyone else must adjust to, whether they admit it or not. Number 11. You showed that restraint was a choice, not a limitation. For most people, patience and restraint are misunderstood as weakness. They see someone holding back and assume that person is incapable of acting, unwilling to take risks, or simply ineffective. That assumption gives others a sense of superiority. They push, they test, they exploit, confident that the limits they perceive are fixed. Your move shattered that illusion. You did not just act. You revealed that every moment of restraint before had been intentional, a calculated choice, not a reflection of inability. That distinction is powerful, and it unsettles people more than any confrontation ever could. The realization hits quietly but deeply. Those who once counted on your patience to maintain their advantage now understand that it was not a limitation. They were simply waiting for the right moment, for the right calculation. They misread discipline for weakness and tolerance for complacency. By acting decisively, you revealed that restraint can be strategic, and strategy is a form of hidden power. It is the kind of power that gets underestimated until it is revealed, and by the time people see it, it is too late to adjust. What makes this revelation so potent is the psychological shift it forces. People realize they have misjudged you for months, maybe years. Their assumptions, their testing, their subtle manipulations, all of it rested on a false premise. That creates a mix of fear, respect, and recalibration. They now see that your patience was not passive, it was selective, deliberate, and measured. It was not an absence of action, it was an accumulation of intent. This insight changes the balance of power quietly, but irrevocably. When restraint is understood as choice, not limitation, it commands respect without explanation. People begin approaching you differently, measuring their actions and reconsidering their assumptions about how far they can go. What you revealed is simple, but profound. Being calm, patient, or measured is not a lack of power. It is the most intelligent deployment of it. And when people realize that, they start treating you as the one in control, whether you speak a word or remain completely silent. Number 12. You made history, not noise. Most people mistake action for impact. They believe that being seen, heard, or noticed is enough to matter. Loud gestures, constant explanations, and visible displays might grab attention, but they rarely leave a mark that lasts. Your move was different. It was not about performance or applause. It did not need validation, commentary, or approval. It created a reference point, a moment that changes how people perceive reality. That is the difference between making noise and making history. Noise fades. History lingers. What makes history-making moves so potent is their permanence. People replay them in their minds, discuss them in whispers, and measure their own choices against them. Your action became a benchmark. Before this, things were one way. After this, everything shifted. It does not matter whether people understand the strategy fully, agree with it, or like it. They remember it. That kind of mark is unshakable because it lives in the collective memory of everyone who experienced it. Unlike noise, which disappears once the moment passes, history carries authority. Your move was not temporary. It rewrote expectations, relationships, and influence in a way that resonates far beyond the instant it happened. Another reason this is so powerful is the subtlety with which it asserts dominance. You did not need to explain. You did not need validation. You simply acted, and the ripple effect was unavoidable. People start treating you differently without being told. Decisions are reconsidered. Conversations are approached with caution. Strategy is recalculated. Your presence alone becomes a marker of change because history has already been set in motion. By making history instead of noise, you positioned yourself above reaction and debate. You became the moment people refer to when discussing authority, judgment, or consequences. Your move is no longer just an event. It is a reference, a standard, and a warning. That is how someone goes from being noticed to being remembered, from being part of the conversation to defining it. You did not just act. You created a lasting impact that no one can ignore. Number 13, you removed the safety of plausible deniability. Plausible deniability is a quiet comfort for many. It allows people to act carelessly, speak freely, and test boundaries without taking responsibility. They rely on ambiguity to shield themselves, pretending they never meant anything or that the outcome was not their fault. That invisible safety net gives them confidence, even arrogance. Your move tore that net away. From that moment, no one could hide behind uncertainty or shrug off accountability. Everything became clear. Every action, every intention, every miscalculation carried weight. The impact is immediate and unavoidable. Those who once assumed they could manipulate situations under the cover of ambiguity are suddenly exposed. They realize that the days of gray zones no longer exist when dealing with you. You set a standard where ambiguity no longer protects them. Their attempts to obscure motives, evade responsibility, or manipulate outcomes now hit a hard boundary, and they have no choice but to confront the reality you established. This is more powerful than any confrontation because it forces an internal reckoning. People begin to measure every word, every gesture, and every action, knowing that there is no escaping consequence. The absence of plausible deniability creates a psychological shift. Hesitation replaces recklessness. Observation replaces assumptions, and respect or fear replaces entitlement. In essence, the move you made redefined the rules without needing an explanation or debate. The brilliance lies in how subtly it changes behavior. You did not have to call anyone out or enforce punishment. By removing the safety net, you forced everyone to operate with awareness and accountability. Their previous strategies, casual manipulations and comfort zones, no longer work, because you made them fully visible to consequence. In doing this, you claimed authority not through aggression or noise, but through clarity. People can no longer misread you, ignore you, or play games at your expense. You made it impossible to operate without being fully seen and fully responsible. And that shift alone positions you as the one in charge. Number 14, you made it clear that access to you is conditional. Before that move, people treated your time, attention, and presence like default settings, something they could take for granted. They assumed proximity to you came without effort, respect, or alignment. That assumption gave them comfort, and it allowed them to operate as if your influence was theirs to borrow whenever convenient. Your move changed all of that. You made it unmistakably clear that being near you, being heard by you, or benefiting from your involvement was no longer automatic. It required something, and they could feel the weight of that shift immediately. The power of conditional access is subtle but overwhelming. When people realize that engagement with you carries requirements, they begin recalculating their behavior. They start considering how they show up, what they say, and whether they have the credibility, respect, or alignment necessary to maintain that connection. Even those who were bold or careless before become cautious, because access now comes at a cost. It is a quiet but undeniable form of control. You did not need to enforce rules or make speeches. The standards were implicit in the way you acted. This shift has ripple effects. Suddenly, people cannot assume influence simply because they have been present or persistent. They understand that proximity alone does not guarantee advantage. They begin to work for your recognition, respect, and acknowledgement rather than taking it for granted. Your move sent a message that your energy, your decisions, and your engagement are valuable commodities, and they must be earned. The brilliance of this is in how it reinforces authority without confrontation. By making access conditional, you created boundaries that force respect, recalibrate expectations, and subtly establish hierarchy. Those who cannot meet the unspoken standards step back, while those who align recognize the stakes and adjust accordingly. In one decisive act, you rewrote the rules of interaction. You showed that your presence is not a convenience, it is a privilege, and only those who understand, respect, and adapt to that reality can engage with you fully. That is how someone becomes the undeniable center of control. Not through noise or aggression, but by making it unmistakably clear who earns a seat at the table and who does not. The final word, the move that changed everything. When you examine what just happened, it is not just a single act, it is a declaration. Every gesture, every choice, every calculated step you took shattered assumptions, recalibrated perceptions, and rewrote the rules that everyone around you thought were untouchable. You did not just act. You redefined the environment. You proved that authority is not something granted, borrowed, or negotiated. It is something seized and quietly enforced, often without a word. From breaking unspoken contracts to eliminating neutrality, from forcing people to update their mental maps of you, to showing that restraint is a choice and not a limitation. Every point we have covered leads to the same undeniable truth. You are now operating on a level they cannot predict, manipulate, or ignore. People around you can try to pretend it has not happened. They can whisper behind closed doors, scramble to adjust strategies, or cling to old assumptions, but they know the reality. They felt the weight of your move the instant it landed. You demonstrated consequences without negotiation, revealed who was only brave when you were compliant, made ambiguity impossible, and set the cost of testing you higher than ever. You showed that access to you is conditional. Your decisions are internally sourced, and your actions leave a permanent mark. These are not isolated effects. They are the pillars of influence and authority that make you the center of attention, the reference point, and the one everyone now measures themselves against. What makes this extraordinary is that it all happened without shouting, without chaos, and without seeking validation. Power expressed in action, strategy, and intention is far more enduring than anything performative. You did not just win the moment, you reshaped the rules, and now everyone else must adapt to the new reality. They are recalculating, hesitating, and adjusting, because the move was not just effective, it was transformative. So remember this: true authority does not demand recognition. It commands it through the shifts it creates. Every choice you make, every boundary you enforce, and every decisive action you take reinforces that position. You did not just make a move, you became the one in charge. And from this point forward, the world operates differently around you. If this video gave you a new perspective, made you think differently, or opened your eyes to the subtle ways power and influence work, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Do not forget to like, comment, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Every action matters, and your engagement helps spread these truths further, because knowledge once shared becomes influence in its own right. God bless you.